Welcome to the Trinity podcast. My name is Joel. I'll be your host for today. And right here at Trinity, we want to help everyday people discover an extraordinary life with God. So I got a couple of our pastors here. We're sitting around a table. We're going to be talking about a little bit of everything. We have Daniel Warren, our executive pastor and also campus pastor out at our Mandarin location. Daniel Riddick, campus pastor out at Oakleaf. And then Pastor Tom Messer, our senior pastor. And I wish we were sitting here celebrating an AFC championship, talking about the Jags going to the Super Bowl. But gentlemen, we're not.
No, we're not.
Bittersweet.
Quick take on the game. Kansas City, Jacksonville. I know it's not a sports podcast, but we got to talk about the Jags when we can. So quick take.
Regionally flavored.
Yes, that's right. Regionally flavored, Duval.
All ministries, local ministry.
I told everybody this week, it's the I've never felt better about a loss, not because we lost the game we wanted to win, but because of where we got to and where we're going. Yeah. So I think Jags fans it's looking up.
The national media consensus seems to be Trevor's going to win a Super Bowl.
He's the guy.
Okay.
And
yeah.
I think the most important position is quarterback. Looks like we've figured that out.
Quarterback and coach.
We got a winner there. The only negative I would say, if you take the roughing the passer call made against us, and you take the roughing the passer call that was overlooked, which seemed to be equal.
Yeah.
In other words,
Right.
I don't have a beef with it being called on us if it was called on them or vice versa. I think potentially you have a tie game in overtime.
Yep.
I mean, truthfully.
Yeah. I feel like we ran out of time. And in fact, my wife went to bed the week before when we were down. So it was only like 6:30, but I was like, Christy, it'd be nice if you would go to bed now so the Jaguars can come back and win this game.
Yeah. It didn't happen.
But she did not. So.
And my favorite tweet was from our children's pastor, Jason Brown. He said, one-legged Patrick Mahomes is better than over 50% of the quarterbacks in the league, so we still got problems.
Yeah, that guy is a competitor. He did not want to come out of that game. I just know that.
Yeah.
He was wanting to play.
I do think what Daniel said a minute ago is I would also echo this, that coaching makes a huge difference. And, there's different talent on the roster clearly today than a year ago. But Peterson is an unbelievable upgrade in head coach.
No doubt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was always the Jags, so there's
It's
always
still the
next
Jags.
year.
Yeah, that's right.
So if you're just joining our podcast, maybe you just found this and you're tuning in, what this is really built around is a couple of pastors sitting around a table talking about current events, maybe talking about church life. Sometimes we dive into sermon topics, and just an opportunity for us to get perspective, biblical perspective on dealing with life's issues. And we're going to hit some stuff that I actually really love and I'm all about is digital trends for the church age. So Kerry Newhoff, I get a lot of his articles and read a lot of them. He also does a podcast. He did an article on digital trends that the church may not be prepared for. And we're not really going to jump into those. I mean, he talks about artificial intelligence. If you guys have not seen this yet, there's some really crazy AI bots online where you could actually tell the AI to write a sermon for you and give it the topic, and it'll come back with a decently well-written. I haven't done this.
Where can I find that?
This is not what student pastors do. Maybe we do. I don't know. But the technology is crazy, especially related to, obviously, church life. But it does give us an opportunity to talk about church online. It's something that obviously we provide here at Trinity. Many churches went to this over COVID out of necessity. But here's the question. Is church online really church? Is church online really church? What are some advantages that you have seen when it comes to church online? And then what are some limitations that you would tell people to watch out for or to be careful only attending church online? So we'll jump in there. Pastor, what's your experience so far?
It's probably better for me than we can do it. I don't have to create tension. So let me say this, and I think it's a really healthy discussion. I'm gonna make a general statement. I think you can have a very narrow view of church, and there's good people that I read after and highly respect, and I would put, for example, Mark Dever in that category. Very narrow view of church. And when I say narrow, I mean it's very focused, specific, and I think it's hard for me to argue against it. And then I think you have the other side of it where there's a very broad view of church, and you know, an example would be that years and years ago, you know, Chuck Swindoll said, get you a couple friends and go down to the beach and get you a Pepsi and an Oreo cookie and have the Lord's Supper. And that just was like, you know,
right.
Yeah. And I love Swindoll.
Yeah.
I think he's a masterful teacher, you know. And so the doctrine of ecclesiology really matters. And so my points would be this. I think there's incredible value in digital experiences. I think I can see it as complementary pathways, important, etc. At the narrower end of church, there's a need for gathering, and there's a need for community, and there's a need for accountability, which means you're submitting yourself to membership, some kind of covenant membership to the church. There's accountability, and you can depending on your model, that's pastoral or member to member accountability, however your model is. And then you have that physical gathering where you celebrate the ordinances, right? Now, can you argue, hey, we can do all that in a digital way? I think you can to a degree, and to the degree that you can do it, there's value. Here's what I would say. I love it as a entryway to church. I love it as a supplement and complement to deeper church engagement. I don't like it as a replacement for church, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does.
And where I'm at, like, totally agree with everything. I think you can have real church online, but watching an online service is not real church. You know, a lot of churches aren't doing real church online, which is community. It's all that. You know, there was the whole. I guess where I'm sort of hesitant to rule it out would be there's a point where the taxi drivers are saying, well, Uber isn't a real taxi service. And the next thing you knew, they're out of it. They don't have a job. You know, right. Airbnb isn't a real option for a hotel. And next thing you know, an Amazon isn't a real department store. And then next thing you know, everything, what we thought we knew. But I think if you're going to say, I go to church online, what do you watch, a sermon online? Do you watch a service online, or are you engaged in a biblical community? I think there's some churches that are really doing well. Some of them have gone into the metaverse, and they're doing these gatherings in this whatever that's called. I'm 50. I don't know what that is.
Virtual reality.
Yeah, there you go.
VR gatherings.
But I think we just saying, well, instead of going to church, I'm just going to watch online, and I never engage in biblical community. It can be a cop-out, or I think there is potential. I think it's harder to do it, and most of us aren't doing online church in a way that is what I would say that biblical picture of a church community we're using as a supplement. And I think you have to be really intentional if you're going to say, this is my church.
I think it's a yes and no, kind of conversation. I think what Pastor said early on about the spectrum of ecclesiology is a really great place to, as people, and I'm even thinking about the people who are listening, people in our church and or connected to us in some way, as they're thinking about digital ministry engagement. I don't think it's as simple as, is it good to watch a service online on a Sunday morning, yes or no? Or, is that, I think you actually should go a little deeper than that and flesh out a robust understanding of ecclesiology, of what the church is. I think if you go down that path, all of a sudden, biblically, you're going to begin to help seat some of these things in their appropriate place, and you'll be able to recognize the advantages and the opportunities of technology, which as a ministry and individually, we all fully embrace. You can watch our services online on Sunday.
Yep.
We're doing a podcast right now. I mean, so
we have a live audience.
Yeah, it would be incredibly hypocritical of us to come across as anything but probably positive towards digital ministry.
Yep.
The flip side is the more deeply you develop your theology of the local church, I think it takes the technology and it seats it appropriately in its right place, and it helps us to form biblically, not my ideas or your ideas, but biblically what the advantages are, but also what the limitations are. And I think it is we have to consider it. And I also think we have to kind of approach a lot of this with an open hand, because the nature of technology does create blurred lines around the ideas that we think maybe at one time, especially generationally, everybody here at this table, that we would only allocate the idea of friendship or relationship in the context of a physical experience. I can promise you can have a conversation with my son who plays online with his friends, and they're engaging in real relationship building and friendship, and so then you have to kind of press that into, okay, but what are the limitations of that, and what are the opportunities of that? And I think we're working through it, but I would say it's actually something you should think deeply about, and not just not approach casually.
To just go back and follow up a little bit, I think what Daniel said a minute ago is a really important distinction, and that is watching a service online is different than engaging online and participating in church. And there's a small distinction in the way that's said, and there's a big distinction in the way that's lived out. And I would even argue a little bit the illustration that he just used is the sum of Braden's relationship with his friends is not an online experience only.
Right.
The online experience enhances what is already a developed friendship that is expressed in a number of different ways, and those other ways are also important to that way. And so here's the point. Just take the Acts 2 example. There's a lot of stuff going on. They were breaking bread. They were praying together. They were baptizing. They were everything that's listed in Acts 2, 41 through 47. And what you get is not just abstract community, but actual physical community. And that doesn't mean that the worship gathering itself has to be physical. It does mean that beyond what's happening online, you have to be meeting needs, you have to be praying, there's all this other stuff that's going house to house.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all in there. And so and again, I had a pastor in my office yesterday, a kid who grew up here, pastors in New York City. And, we were just kind of reminiscing. And one of the things he said, he said, I still feel so connected to Trinity, and it's my church. Now he pastors a church, and he said, hey, I watch online every time I can. And he said, I've got this guy in my church, he's got this problem, and I listened to a sermon you preached a couple weeks ago, and he said, I was having a hard time getting this guy to work through this issue. And he said, I told him, listen to this sermon. The guy called him back. He goes, okay. He said, I get it now, kind of deal. And so I don't think the guy listening to that sermon is he didn't do church. What we put online was a resource for him. Right. He's actually getting church from up there, and they shared a resource that we provided, but they were doing church. They were doing the accountability together over common resource, exposure to resource. And I think sometimes if we're not careful, we substitute the little bit of part we play in providing the resource and calling that church. What he did was church. What we did in that case was provide resource. And my point is, I think that guy is really having a very good church experience, and I think the guy's providing really good pastoral care in his life, and I think discipleship is taking place, and all of that. And that's not a substitute. That's my point. It's not a substitute for that's essential to the whole church experience.
I was thinking we have people on every campus that they are here on a Sunday. They hear the sermon, they listen to the music, and then they leave. They're not engaged in church. They showed up for the show. Mm-hmm. And that's not real church.
That's
the same thing. Tuning in, watching the service doesn't make you part of a real church. There are multiple facets. And if they can be done online, that can be a real church. If you're just showing up for a show, that's why for us, our discipleship pathway is you come together and worship, you grow in groups, you serve on a team and use your gifts to minister to the church body, and then you go on mission, all 4 aspects. And I think if you're doing all that with relationships and in biblical community, the medium is a whole nother, that's going to evolve over time. But we have people that are listening to the podcast, and I see them, we talk to them almost every Sunday, like, you're not in church, you're just showing up for the show. For what you need to be in community.
Yeah. I think here's a kind of a residual. It's like, hey, here's reality. Now here's an application. Let me make an observation, and an observation is this: that at the end of the day, we have to keep calling people. We may have to expand what our idea about church is, but we shouldn't call people to a less commitment to whatever that is. Right. We have to call people to a higher commitment to what that is, even though what that is, like an example would be, when I started pastoring here 30 years ago, there was one Sunday morning service. And in reality, I always felt for years that the best church gathering we had was our Sunday night service, because I preached to more people on Sunday night than I did on Sunday morning, because so many of our people on Sunday morning were serving. They were going to church. They were highly engaged in church. They weren't in a worship service, okay? Now, think about how rarely we have a singular gathering, and really, I mean, you could argue never a singular gathering. And we're literally in 6 campuses on 3 different locations, and I would argue that probably a vast majority of the time, a good number of our people are not even in those 6 gatherings. Okay.
Right. And online. Simultaneously.
Yeah.
Right.
So, you have, and I think, so the tension on one hand is providing church in as many, in as broadly and as specific a way as we can, and then calling people to that high commitment that attending is not church. And I love that. I think that's one of the things that I do appreciate, I think, a lot about like the 9 Marks movement, is that, whatever you define it as, whatever your membership is, be committed to that. And if you're committed to that, now if you don't define it well, you got a problem. But if you define it well, and I think largely I'm happy with the way we define it, let's just commit to that. And if we do that, then it can express itself in a number of different ways.
So just last week, we actually had someone watching online that put in the comments below that they had accepted Jesus while watching the service online, which is awesome. Amazing. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
So it's such a useful tool to hear that. And there's always people that I'll meet that will attend our church that will say, hey, I've been watching online for a couple of weeks. I decided to come in person. So again, another great resource. But to what you were saying, maybe there's some people listening or watching. Are there certain things they should guard against or look out for when it comes to actually discipleship in the digital world? Is discipleship something, come, grow, serve, go, that can only happen together in the local church, or can someone be discipled through virtual reality, online?
I think this goes back to this, and I think the spirit of what we would hope as we're kind of pastoring our people, but even the people that are listening to this, would be that you really kind of come to some conclusions about the role of the local church. And I think I've said this 100 times on a Sunday morning. It's just impossible to read the New Testament, which is predominantly a collection of letters written to, regional or individual churches, and not come to the obvious conclusion that the local church kind of sits at the the center of the way that God is working mission and ministry today. And so if that's the case, you kind of have to really kind of come to some conclusions about what that is. And then to me, a great test would be, are all of these things that I'm engaged with digitally or whatever, are they pulling me, are they resourcing me and deepening my commitment and connection to a local church? Or are they actually becoming replacements for or feeding, behaviors that are disconnecting me? And so for example, I think it is so good that if somebody wakes up sick on a Sunday morning, that they have a way to stay connected in a deeper way than they would have without the technology. I mean, there's nothing negative about that. I think it's incredible if somebody's out of town for work or whatever, that they have a way to deepen their connection to the local church. I think you can take the same tool and wake up on a Sunday morning and go, well, I'm tired and, I don't want to, and the tool then actually is feeding something that's disconnecting you from a local church. And so the tool's a tool, the medium's a medium. I think it's how we use it. And then I do think, to your question about the discipleship, I think we have to be careful and kind of circumspect about the voices that we're allowing to speak into our life. And again, I think it goes back to and how that truth or those mediums or those tools or those individual speakers or whatever they are, pastors, are pulling us away from or pushing us toward local church community.
So Daniel, is it a good thing then that obviously you can get online and you can pull up a church from anywhere in the world basically and watch? If someone were to say, hey, I live in Florida, but my church is in California and this person online is my pastor. Is there a danger in that, or is that kind of an okay thing because of the world we live in, that you can be a part of a church that's 1,000 miles away?
So I think it's going to echo yes and no. There are people in the city that say Tom Messer's my pastor, and you don't know who they are. Who knows the last time they've darkened the door of a church? They have no relationship. There's no pastoral care happening, but they watch online or they used to go here, whatever. And if that relationship exists only because you listen to them teach every once in a while or regularly, but there's no relationship. I mean, I think, like I said, there are churches that really develop community and pastoral care and all that in their online platforms. And if that's happening, I think what's the definition of a church? So I think it is very dangerous if it's enabling bad behavior or promoting bad behavior and disconnection. But it can also be a really great thing if it is a tool that's been developed. People are stewarding their gifts and abilities as a church. Life Church has incredible resources and technology and ability within their church, and they're leveraging that. They've written, they do the Bible app to disciple millions of people around the world, and many people have connected with them online. And if they're being good stewards of those people and the relationship that's being entrusted with them, and the people are engaged in biblical community, then it's good. It's a valid thing. But if it's, he's my pastor because I like to hear him preach, and I don't engage in local community because of that. Yeah, that's a cop-out, I think.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things you have to have a little bit of caution about. And like here would be an example. There's a lot of people, what he just said is absolutely true. And there's a lot of people, I mean, I famously, I can tell numbers of stories. I'll be at places downtown, and fairly influential people in the city have introduced me to friends of theirs, and say to me, or they will say to these people, "This is my pastor," and I have said, "I did not know that." I said, there's nothing in your activity that would have ever led me to believe that is
we share
true.
That relationship.
And I've been just absolutely shocked about it. But so let me say a couple things. There's probably a small handful of preachers that I like to listen to, and I see them as great resources. I would never call them my pastors. I would say they are preachers I like to listen to.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Even in the model that we use here, I don't say this. There's a lot more to it. I'm going to make a very narrow statement. I think it's for us, not being critical of anybody else. It's for us a healthier model to have a live pastor, a campus pastor, communicate the Word of God personally, not digitally. Now, I think there's 10 good reasons we could have a discussion about the other 9. One of those reasons, and an important reason to me, is I think that the people that are listening, for example, to Daniel at Mandarin or Daniel at Oakleaf, they need to know he lives that out. It's like if I was just communicating from here, from a stage, it just feeds into more of that whole performance idea. Again, I'm not being critical. There's really good people that I enjoy listening to that are wonderful communicators, and they're delivering video experiences in their churches. And there's not a criticism there. But, the way he acts in Starbucks in Oakleaf matters. Right? And when he lives out when he incarnates out the Word, when he fleshes out the Word, there's a far greater chance that people are going to be impacted, and that the credibility level goes up, and the shepherding opportunity increases. And I had breakfast with a guy today, and we talked about his life journey, and we talked about his walk with God, and we talked about sermons that I've preached in the last 3 to 4 or 5 weeks, and I did 100-fold application of what I've preached over the last month in his life on a personal level, because we have a personal, what I would call, it's a friendship, but it's a pastoral relationship, and you're not going to get that from a guy in California, and we actually think that there's high value to that. So I think we have to be careful that we don't default to the simplest, most reductionist way of looking at this. There's my own kids will send me stuff, and they'll say, "Hey, Dad, what do you think about this?" And I sometimes say, "I wouldn't listen to that guy for 15 seconds." And they're shocked, but I know things about him that they would never know. And I don't say it in I just factually, shepherds have to watch for wolves, right? And there's bad theology out there, and that's why there's that need. Now, I'm not saying these are not resources, and I'm not saying we have people. Missionaries would be an example. People that have come through here and moved to other places would be an example. They have a deeper affinity and connection to our church, and there is an element of pastoral care, and there's an element of connectivity and commitment to each other that the digital world can deliver. But, to think that I'm actually pastoring somebody that, has access to the internet in Africa, no. No, I'm not.
This whole conversation, I'll tell you what it does for me personally, even thinking through it, is it challenges, there's a lot of layers to this. It challenges my kind of, my consumerism. And, it's kind of like, hey, if you come and you want a better sermon or a better preacher, and that's the whole thing of what church is, I'm probably going to send you to one of our other campus locations, or to another church in town, or certainly to somebody online who's a world-class communicator, and it's like, if you come and you go, man, that the song that the band just sang, that was incredible. I could say, well, you should really hear the people who actually wrote it and recorded it, but it's more than that. And so it's like, when I start thinking through it, I kind of get challenged from that consumer mentality, which I think is pervasive in our whole world, but even within the Christian world. And this should, hopefully the conversation puts a little bit of that in check, that, the church is more than a sermon, or more than a preacher or personality, more than a song.
Yeah. Let me just say this, and let me say these 2 things. I love the idea that you brought this up. I think it's a healthy conversation. and I'm not challenged by the need to expand my thinking about this. I think all that's valid. Here's a thought. Are we leading people to be committed to the experience? Or are we leading people to be committed, and I'm going to use the word covenant, but to the membership?
Yeah.
Right? And again, I know this is, I'm on the downhill side of this, and I walked uphill to school both ways in the snow. I mean, I get all that, but I tried to say this the other day in a conversation that they did around my anniversary here, is that when I joined our church, we met in a gym, and it was painful. I mean, it was not the experience was not an experience. And I don't mean that. I mean, I've been in those services enough where the hair on the back of my neck stood up because you could sense the presence of God. So I'm not diminishing that thing, but I'm telling you, there was nursery once a month, and there was nursery duty once a month. And,
Okay.
And I tell people the only thing more painful than dropping your kids off 3 times a week to a nursery where they're going to scream when you walk away is being in the nursery once a month when somebody else drops their kids off screaming and they walk away and you're left with the screaming kid. And
our nursery director is going to cut that out of the podcast.
Yeah. But the point is this. We were more committed to what the membership meant, both give and take, than we were to the experience. And I think churches are stronger when membership matters. And again, I'm not diluting the fact that you can have a digital experience in that, but that's what we're committed to, not the experience.
That's really, really good. Hey, we're going to take a break right there.
As we talk about digital resources in the church, you really should download the Trinity app. On the app, you're going to find a ton of incredible media resources, every episode of this podcast. And if you're in the Jacksonville area, you can get details on our 3 Jacksonville locations and take next steps toward deeper connection in our church. You can download the Trinity app for free by searching in iPhone and Android app stores, or if you have some weird third party, you can look for it there as well.
So over the last 2 Sundays, we have put an intentional emphasis on biblical ideas of justice and the sanctity of life on their respective weekends, MLK Day and Sanctity of Life Sunday. While these are clearly biblical issues, they are simultaneously social and oftentimes political as well. And what I'd be interested in hearing from you all is how should churches and church people address issues like the ones that we've addressed and other issues that intersect with the Bible, society, and politics? What are the best ways to talk about these issues? I know some people would probably say, hey, we should talk more about issues like this. There are other people that would probably say, we should talk less about issues like this. How do you see that from your perspective, standing up on a Sunday and communicating to people at your church?
I recommend a strongly worded Facebook rant.
And that's the end of our podcast.
That'll really get the conversation going.
It always works well. I think when I think about these issues, there's 2 things I think of. Throughout Scripture, in the Old Testament, I'm going to give an Old Testament illustration I think anchors me and sort of how I do it, and then a New Testament. In the New Testament, Paul wrote the letters to the churches, and all but Ephesians are what we would call occasional letters. There was something going on in the church that he needed to address. When he wrote Ephesians, there was enough going on in the church in Asia Minor that he's like, let me proactively address these issues in your life and in your church life. So I think when things arise, either in the media, in community, we need to be prepared to speak into it. To me, that says I'm not an activist that's always trumping this, but I am actively involved in what's going on in my community, and I'm willing to speak truth to power, speak truth to those that are suffering injustice, And I think we see that in the Old Testament. David, whenever he didn't fight every battle when the supporters of Absalom were cursing him, he's like, I'm not going to get involved I'm not going to fight this battle. I think we see that in Scripture. We don't always fight our own issues. There's a time for everything when it comes to some of those hot button issues. And then for me, the sanctity of life thing, to me, it is a conviction. But again, I'm speaking to it as God brings it into my circle. And I don't mean as a cop-out. I think sometimes we can be too passive, but I'm also not. We are trying to prepare people for the kingdom, not make this world solely better. It's this will never be what we want. When the King comes, he will make all things new. Yeah. We are preparing the way for the King through the gospel. So that's sort of my take on it. On when is particularly to get involved in it.
Yeah, definitely. Are there ways to have outside of a Facebook rant?
I was kidding.
I know. But what are the best ways to have healthy engagement and conversation around hot button topics like this that are social, political, but then there's also a biblical perspective on issues like this?
I think you just said it. I actually think oftentimes the place to start the conversation, while what Daniel said is true, specifically, like they may be elevated because of a specific circumstance or instance, or even like in our context, there was intentionality about preaching what we preached on Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. There was intentionality about addressing the issues of the sanctity of life on Sanctity of Life Sunday. Right. So there may be real reasons why we're talking about it. I think beginning, what you just said is they're biblical issues. Mm-hmm. And so let's maybe in the conversation disconnect them from maybe even the circumstance or the situation, disconnect them from maybe some of the kind of the rhetoric. And then I would say almost in every case, please disconnect them from the politics. Yep. And then let's start with, what does the Bible say about this? Right. If you begin there and then kind of start fleshing out, how the implications of what the Bible says, what God's word says about whatever it is, whatever the issues are, you're gonna be on the road to landing in the right place, or you're gonna get to the right conclusions if they've begun biblically. I think the big challenge that we have, and I mean we in the collective sense of the word, the church, Christian people, is we begin the conversations in the most inflammatory place. We begin the conversation in partisanship. We begin the conversation in the incident. We begin the conversation, and I'm not saying you can't get to a healthy conclusion, but oftentimes you start building on a flawed foundation, and then you can get into some real trouble.
It's a really broad subject, and there's a lot you have to process, and you learn over time. And so think about this. One real simple is, if you just commit yourself to preach the Bible, eventually you're going to get to every important subject. So that kind of takes the guesswork out of it. And that doesn't mean it's not wise to leverage off like what we've done this month with Martin Luther King, the whole conversation around race, Sanctity of Life Sunday, and our series just happen to align where they're very complementary to what's happening in current events. You have to remember that there are times in ebbs and flows where culture and Christianity are harmonious to each other, and like think about in the 1980s. And again, it happened a little bit in the early 2000s after 9/11. Patriotism was very complementary to Christianity, and you have this ebb and flow that they're kind of just synergistic, and there's not a lot of tension about that. We're living in a day and age where everything that you do that is semi-political is Christian nationalism, and right. It's problematic. Well, the reality is people they're not just one thing. if you only speak to insiders, you only see people as one thing, homogenous. Everybody has the same worldview. If you have a church that is diverse, and we are becoming much more that way, we have people that are across the lines in a lot of different ways. We have private school kids, homeschool kids, public school kids. We have people that would traditionally be conservative and people that would traditionally come from a more liberal background. And so what you have to do is you have to find a way to make the biblical speaking into issues from a biblical perspective. That is not the same as speaking from a political perspective. It's not the same as speaking from a cultural perspective. It's not the same. It's what Keller famously calls it the third way, right? You have left and right. You have religious, secular, whatever the tensions are. The Bible's not a third alternative to that. The gospel's the third way that you look at that. And when you come at it from the third way, it actually creates tension for both views. And we're not trying to appease an extreme or a sided partisan view. We're trying to get to a divinely revealed view that typically is going to look upside down.
Would you explain quickly what that third way is like? To me, it's an incredible concept to help people process this. Would you explain why the third way is also, because sometimes it gets confused with being the middle way. In other words, it's just the it's just the kind of happy medium between two warring factions. The third way is not a middle way. It's something. Just kind of create
so
if you take take poverty, which is probably a fairly easy one to do. So in a political lens, in an extreme lens, one side is going to say people are in poverty because they make really bad choices, and they fail on the side of individual responsibility. Okay, that's a conservative view. Poverty is the result of bad choices that people make. And if they make better choices, and we shouldn't enable them, right? A liberal view of poverty is they're in poverty because government has failed them, and they see the system as being stacked against them. And the solution then is more government. Because if you don't create a level playing field, if you don't help them out of there. Well, the gospel doesn't come along and say, I wonder if we can take 50% responsibility and 50% government solution. Yeah. The gospel actually is, the classic is he who is very rich became poor so that we that were poor could become rich. And so the gospel is actually going to shatter both a individualistic view and a corporate community solution, and say it's actually radically transformationally different. It's not a little bit of each of those. It's completely upside down. Right. And the gospel is going to say that actually you only renew individual responsibilities and choices when you have an inside-out transformation, and people that are experiencing inside-out transformation don't use their power to oppress people. They're actually willing to distribute their power and use their power to elevate people. And the goal, for example, in corporate church life is not to accumulate more power. It's actually to use that power to help unempowered people or disengage people, disadvantaged people, to have access to what the gospel riches would give to them in Jesus. So it's a completely different way. And that's why I think you can have delicate conversations and think about, you have to have wisdom as a communicator. Like Sunday, the tension was, I know 8 to 10 women in our church that have actually had abortions, and they have walk through very painful grief, and you don't add a lot to help them by only singularly taking the side of we're against abortion and we condemn it to the fullest extent. There's a way to do that where you can crush somebody. Yeah, absolutely.
And the gospel actually, Jesus did say, for example, to the woman in John 8, neither do I condemn thee, go and sin no more. You think about the nuance and the balance and And really the two extremes, you're free from guilt, quit sinning.
Yeah.
Don't quit sinning so you get free from guilt. I'm going to free you from your guilt by myself because I'm going to pay the price for what you did. And that should free you up, that you don't have to go live that way anymore. And that's the gospel. That's a radical nature of the gospel in the conversation. And, again, I think you have to work hard at it. I think you have to, have balance. I mean, we'll probably get a lot of criticism over this, but this is reality. The Christian school movement and particularly in the South is huge. There's big Christian schools. We have one. What we don't like to talk about is these Christian schools were started in reaction to the Brown versus Board of Education ruling about busing and forced desegregation.
They were in response to desegregation.
And, okay, now I don't think that makes what we're doing bad. In fact, our student body enrollment is very much a reflection of what the racial demographic is in the city of Jacksonville. Yeah. It took us a while to get there, and it took some intentionality, and it took some pain. And I think it takes, I'm more wise about it now. I'm more comfortable about it. But I think it takes some lamenting, and I think it takes some repentance. And I'm not saying it's going to be, but man, I mean, I had a guy one time just. Absolutely. He went off on me because we had black students in our school. And he said, what are you going to do about it? I said, actually, I'm not going to do anything about it. I said, I think what you ought to do about it is pull your kids out and find another school for them. Because whatever I'm for, I'm not for you. I don't know what you want me to, but I'm not that. Yeah. And I think over the years, I mean, this is a funny thing to me. I prayed at the Martin Luther King breakfast last Friday and was sitting on the platform. And I think the mayor and I were the only two white people on the platform in the Martin Luther King thing. It was a great event. And I was honored to be a part of it and felt like that's the kind of thing. Now, on the other side, I don't think Martin Luther King was perfect. That's not my issue. I think he was right on the need for justice, and he was speaking to what was a very painful thing. And his book, The Letters from the Birmingham Jail, that is a powerful read, and has been very impacting on me and caused me to have to think through really a biblical perspective about race and about racial justice.
I think, Joel, anytime you get into, like I said, the framing of your question about these kinds of issues that have all these connections they're biblical, they're social, they're political, they're whatever, they're hot button, however you want to frame that. I think, too, and Daniel kind of alluded to this, I think I feel this way personally as an individual, and then I think as pastors, we feel it even more and more. It feels like in the world we live in today, we feel like there's this kind of pressure that we have to speak to everything. And I think what Daniel said earlier is a really helpful reminder that while without a doubt there's tragedy in this world and there's injustice and there's violence and everything, and it's all, and we can easily, I mean, it's not difficult for us to condemn any and all of it. I think there's wisdom and value in deciding what we're going to lend our voice to in a moment, and I think as pastors and within the context of a local church, and that's how we're sitting this conversation, where it begins to really kind of should sit heavy for us is the things that are impacting our community, our congregation, and yeah, occasionally they may be at a national or global level, but there's a lot of wisdom sometimes in thinking before we speak, and I read this morning. Not in thinking about this conversation, but we're doing that F-260 Bible reading as a church. So we were in Job this morning, And, God responds to Job and really declares his greatness, and how, and Job finally responds back in chapter 42. And he says, which I thought this is great awareness and a great principle. Job says, "Surely I spoke about things I did not understand." And a lot of our problems in these conversations are because we have spoken before we've thought. And we've spoken about things that we did not understand deeply. And so I think there's some wisdom sometimes in, and that is in no way an excuse for being passive or for being silent. That's not what I'm saying. But there is a need for us to be thoughtful about this.
So if we're going to have healthy conversations and discussions about issues like this, what are some ways we can avoid, or someone listening can avoid, maybe the pitfalls, or as Daniel says, the two ditches you can fall in, or overcome just the nerves that may surround having a conversation like this? I mean, you all do it on a stage in front of a lot of people. I can only imagine maybe what your inbox looks like on the next day when you address a very sensitive topic. How do you overcome issues like that? How do you overcome the nerves or the hesitancy to talk about things like this?
Well, for one, if you have issue with anything said on this podcast today, the email is J.O. Milligan.
Don't email that.
I think for me, I think Micah 6:8, do justly,
3 things required.
love mercy, and walk humbly with God. Yeah. And if we go into these type of things, really committed to justice and speaking the truth, doing it in a state of mercy. We have a whole Embrace Grace ministry, which is helping women who are on the other side of an abortion receive grace and forgiveness and mercy and community and help. And then walk humbly. Mm-hmm. I think so many times. I read a book last year by Esau McCauley, Reading While Black, Understanding African-American Hermeneutics and the impact of their culture and what their history on their interpretation of Scripture. And he's similar age to me. I'm reading through what his high school and young adult life. I'm like, I have none of this experience. Mm-hmm. And for me to think that my Southern white middle class experience is the universal common or most common experience, that's a very arrogant thing. So if I walk humbly, I love mercy, and I do justly by people, and I'm a justice warrior and a good thing. I fight for when wrong is happening. Then I think that is the key. It has to be all three. Yeah. If I just do justly and love mercy, but I'm not humble, then I can get really out of whack. If I love mercy and I'm humble, but I'm not about justice, then I'm timid and if I, whatever I've left out, it takes all three.
If you're just to echo on that, if you're merciful and humble, then you won't be threatened. If somebody disagrees with you, you won't be threatened by an idea that challenges an idea that you have. You won't be. It disarms so much, and so I think what Daniel said is great. It really helps encourage conversation. You can have really healthy conversation about complicated, difficult, painful issues, whatever they are, with mercy and humility. Mm-hmm. Without those two things, it's war. Yep. And which is, we talk about culture war, and it's like that's the problem, is we're at war, and we don't need to be. That's good.
So a couple things, Joel. One, surprisingly, my inbox is not very full. There's a couple reasons for it. One, my private email is a little harder to find than my public email. And my public email goes to his mom, and she screens those for me. That's one. Two, when you stay someplace long enough that people just, they don't. I'll say this for younger Christians and younger communicators, and it dovetails off what Daniel said a minute ago. When you're preaching, you do not have to say everything that you know. Mm-hmm. Okay? But you better know, or you better not say more than you do know.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's
right. Yeah. And it's better to say what you know within well thought out. And that's just that's preparation and maturity. And what we oftentimes fail to do is we speak, this goes back to what he said, we have a tendency to speak from our experience as though our experience is the universal shared experience.
Yeah.
And it's not. So you're better. And that's why a real tension in good biblical preaching is that the Holy Spirit is much better at applying truth than we are. We should apply it, but we should leave room for the Spirit of God to make the application. Because you're talking in each of our cases, we're speaking to people beyond. We don't know everything about them. Mm-hmm. We don't know everything they've gone through in that week. And if you in a sermon that bends too much or exclusively to application, you're assuming that you can apply to, and there's always somebody out there who's outside the realm of the good application that you're making. Mm-hmm. But if you have good interpretation, you set the stage for even a broad application becomes a pathway. It opens a little ditch in somebody's life where the Spirit of God can flood through with the love of God and begin to press into areas of their life that are unique to them, and they can work through those issues. And that's where, this is what I love, that's where a lot of people come to me and they'll say, hey, I was thinking about what you said this morning, or I was thinking about what you said last week, and how would that apply to this? Mm-hmm. And there's so many times I've been thankful that I didn't try to apply it.
You didn't try to apply it, yeah.
Because what they needed was that extra little bit of mm-hmm. thing to process. And I think that's true here. We're not responsible for perfect application in some of these things. We're responsible for correct interpretation mm-hmm. and saying it. I love the analogy from the Micah 6, speak the truth and speak it in love. If we speak the truth in love, we set the platform and set the stage for the Spirit of God to do the application to that. Mm-hmm.
Really great conversation today. Really appreciate you all taking the time to join us. And thank you for watching or listening to the Trinity podcast today. As always, we invite you to come back every week. These podcasts are available every Tuesday. You can find them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on YouTube, or on the Trinity app. I encourage you to go download that today. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.